So I had a very emotional connection to him and to his story. Nonetheless, I've tried to tell the story in a way that's engaging, that's cinematic, that's accessible to people that are not interested in Iran, that are not interested in the CIA, that are not interested in U.S. relations with the outside world, but just want a good story. I think that's the way you reach larger audiences. I don't like to just preach to the converted. So, this book has had a fantastic life. It has sold hundreds of thousands of copies. It's my best-selling book. And I can remember while writing it, I thought to myself, you might write a better book than this someday. You might write a book that sells more copies than this someday. But you are never going to find an episode that was this important in history that has never been written about. Most incidents that are big and important have lots of books about them. But those are the episodes that make us look good. We don't want to hear stories that don't make us look like heroes. I think that's really part of the reason why there's such an endless fascination in this country with World War II. Was it a big incident? Of course. Was it hugely important for the world? Of course. But I think part of the American fascination with World War II is because World War II shows us the way we like to think that we are. So we fight evil dictators, and afterwards we leave democracies. We remember that one, but we don't remember all the times when we overthrew democracies and imposed dictatorships. Just a question of telling the story. I am not a polemicist. The part of my books that I'm the most proud of is the footnotes. Everything I'm writing, it's from somewhere. It happened. I didn't make anything up. If I write that the moon was shining over a choppy lake, you can be sure I checked it, and the moon was out that night, and the lake was choppy. I don't make up anything. It's all there in the book. I tell people that are criticizing me for the drift of my stories, show me anything that isn't true. I'm just telling you what happened. I don't make the news. I just report it. So this actually fits in with the style of journalism I've always liked to practice, which is, now that I'm not a newsman anymore, I can say something that I wasn't able to say all those 25 years, and that is, I'm really not interested in news. News, to me, is a big distraction, because when you're totally focused on what's just happening today, you're not focusing on two things that are much more important. One is, what happened yesterday? Why is this happening? And the other is, what's going to happen tomorrow? What does this mean? There are the great pressures to make sure that people don't think too much about those things. So let's fill them up with news about what just happened right now. What's the latest earthquake? Where did a boy fall into a well? Where is there some colorful murder case going on? That way you don't have to figure out what you think about more complicated issues. Now, when that book first came out, I did my first book tour. And a number of Iranian Americans turned out, as you can imagine. And I had some very moving moments. I'm just going to tell one story that happened here. It was in San Francisco. I spoke at the World Affairs Council. And I had to get there early because I was doing an interview. In fact, I think it was Abbas Milani. We were meeting for some reason. I don't remember anymore. Anyway, I had to get to the show like 45 minutes in advance. So I get there, and as I'm walking through the room, I see there's already about 6 people there, even though it's 45 minutes early. They're all sitting together. And as I start speaking, I can see that these are all elderly Iranian men. They have come as a group. I'm standing up there and telling the story. And bear in mind, this was the first time this book had just come out. The discussion had not nearly spread the way it has now. I was telling the story of Mossadegh, who he was, what he was doing, what the situation was in Iran then, and what the Americans did and the British did. And I was looking down at these guys in the front row, and they were weeping. They were literally sobbing. It was very emotional, and afterwards I had to go over to them. And I had a very impressive conversation with them. More or less, this is what they said to me. You know, we came to America many years ago, and we started telling our neighbors when they said, so why are you here? After a while, we would start telling a little bit of the story. Well, you know, we had a democracy once, but the CIA came in, and then we had a dictatorship, so we couldn't stay, and we had to leave. However, our neighbors looked at us very strangely. They had never heard about this. They didn't know it happened. And they began to think that we were a little crazy, that we were making it all up. What do you mean there was a coup? There was democracy in Iran, the CIA. So, you know what? We stopped talking about it because we didn't want people to think we were crazy. So, all these years, like decades, we have just eliminated this from our minds, the whole Mossadegh story, even though that's the reason we're here. It shaped our whole lives. We didn't even tell our kids about it because we were thinking, what's the point of letting them caught up in this story that nobody else is going to believe and it's just going to make their lives harder? Now that this book has come out, we go to our children, we give it to our children. They are reading it now, and then they can see what we did. When we were kids, we were in the National Front. We gave our lives for this man, for this movement, for the idea of democracy in Iran, but we were never able to tell our kids about it, and basically because of what happened, we thought our lives had been wasted. We worked on something that nobody noticed, that nobody cared about, and meant nothing. Now, 50 years later, you're standing in front of us, and they also say, and not an Iranian, an American is standing in front of us and saying, you didn't make it up. It happened, and it was real, and it was important. Your lives have meanings, and they were overwhelmed by this. I think they felt that as they look back now on their lives, they felt something different about themselves and what they had done. And I think that this is a wonderful thing to happen in any community. It's been a thrill for me to be able to be a part of this and to participate in a community's rediscovery of a very important part of its own history. But that can't be the end of the story. You know, it's nice to tell history, but once you get to the end of the story, there's a logical impulse to say, so what? Okay, now we know that happened. Okay, now what? This is especially true because the United States and Iran are now locked in what must be the most dysfunctional relationship in the entire world. There are no two countries in the world that have been at each other's throats this intensely for this long. So it's a unique relationship in the world, and must be particularly unsettling for Iranian Americans. Those of us Americans who do go to Iran are always impressed with how unbelievably pro-American are the Iranian people. It's the opposite of what you would expect. They are swooning. When I was there last year, I was standing at a traffic light in Shiraz, and the person next to me asked me where I was from, and I said, America. Whoa! But then 10 seconds, I have like 8 people around me, shrieking. One woman is saying, we know they say terrible things about us over there, but we love America so much. You don't even get that in Canada. This pro-American sentiment in Iran is a huge strategic asset for the United States in the future. Whatever we do, we shouldn't do anything to endanger that asset. That is very important. That Iranian-American tie is very deep. Actually, these last 50 years or these last 35 years have been a kind of an aberration. There's no reason why these two countries should be separated. The reasons have all not to do with the fact that our interests are at odds, as we're sometimes told. In fact, American interests and Iranian interests overlap quite a bit. The reason we can't be more friendly is that we're not even thinking about issues, about interests. What we're thinking about is emotion. We're still caught up in the hostage crisis, and the Iranians have their own obsessions, all of which are also well justified. But we remain at a very tense point in relations between these two countries. We were at a serious crisis point in the last period of President Bush's years, when it really looked like there might be some horrible military action taken. We're coming up on another election year. Everyone in Washington on election time is always looking for someone to beat up on. Iran is one of the great targets to beat up on. There are very powerful interests in Washington, just as there are very powerful interests in Tehran that are eager to make sure there's no reconciliation between these two countries. They are deeply invested in the hostility. Now in Washington, it is very hard for a clear voice of reason to be heard on any issue, especially on the issue of Iran, because you have such highly paid and highly sophisticated and highly experienced lobbyists and manipulators of opinion working every day on the other side. It really is an unequal fight. It shouldn't be that way, because the Iranian community in this country has the ability to put forward its case in Washington in the way that certain very small countries that are a little bit near Iran are very successful at doing. But this community is punching way below its weight in Washington, and we're seeing it. There is no one speaking out for the idea that there can be a different relationship between these two countries. That's why NIAC is so important. There is no other organization that is doing what Trita and his people are doing in Washington now. I can't overstate the importance of this. It is, without NIAC, there is a huge vacuum. NIAC is really a little, they're keeping their thumb in the dike is really what it's like. There are huge pressures in Washington on the other side. So, for those of you that liked my book, and for those of you that feel that you'd like to see this book have some kind of an impact, several of you have already asked me, so what do we do now? Well, that's the answer that I want to leave you with. If you feel like the ideas that are promoted in this book are worth spreading, and the idea that the United States and Iran have much in common is one that you'd like to see promoted in Washington, if you would like to see some fact-based organization stand up to all the lies and distortions that are dominating discussion about Iran, please consider what you can do for NIAC, because this is the concrete, specific, tangible answer to the question, I loved your book, what do we do now? The answer is right here in front of you. Thank you very much.
Why don't you stay here?